Hey, 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 one story a day. This is where I'm coming from today. Long, long time ago, deep in the Europe, years and years ago, there were witches. And witches, by the definition of witch, is someone who worships Satan, the devil. Okay? That's the definition of witch. And warlock, a male who worships Satan, the devil. Now, yes, there was lots of false witches that people just burned at the stake in Europe, but there were true witches. And most of those got away because they really were witches. And so the story goes, these witches in Europe became persecuted. And they decided they wanted to go to America where there was freedom of religion. And they thought, well, they said freedom of religion. Our religion is we worship Satan. This should be, a no-brainer. It will be easy to go to the United States and do our thing openly with no persecution. Well, they were wrong. Freedom of religion meant not that religion. So they were persecuted, and they had to go into hiding. And so some of them went to Louisiana, the bayous, and hid in the bayous, and some of them went to Maine. Now remember, this is a story, guys, okay? Went to Maine when the persecutions in Boston began against the witches, when the big witch hunt went on. They got out of there. They set camp in Maine in the wilderness, and they hid. And they did a pretty good job of keeping to themselves, and they didn't like outsiders coming in because they didn't want to find out who they were. They put up pagan churches. They looked like Christian churches because a lot of the pagan churches where they came from were very similar to the churches that they were putting up in the communities with the pagan phallic symbols and the crosses, things like that. They already had those in their worship, so it wasn't hard to disguise themselves. Only time you could figure out what they were doing is at night when you would peek into their church windows and see, their type of religious behavior, which was witchcraft. Okay, witches, sacrificing things to the devil, things like that. So, also, there was a witch code in Maine, which was do not do anything to bring suspicion on yourself. Keep as many outsiders out of our town, but also don't bring anything to bring suspiciousness to yourself. If you get pregnant and you're not married, which was the thing witches did, they got pregnant when they weren't married. They didn't believe in marriage. But they were living in a country where marriage, if you didn't get married, it could raise suspicion that you were a witch. And so they were trying to keep that on the down low. So they would get married if they got pregnant. They were loveless marriages, of course, because witches and warlocks were never meant to live together. This is not they are not a harmonious group. They don't have love. They have, let's use each other for sexual pleasure, and we're done. So living together was impossible. The men cheated on the wives constantly, and the women usually cheated on the men too. But once they got past that bloom of youth, witch women weren't much into sex. They were more into sex with Satan, doing the warlock thing and having out-of-body experiences and things like that, and their magic tricks. And every witch had special powers. Some witches had the power of being able to do a curse and cause terrible havoc on a family. And the only families that they had problems doing curses on or doing magic on were families who were doing the very best they could to serve God. Some of them were, not very close to serving God yet, but they were, in the process of learning about God and learning what the Bible had to say and doing their best to practice it. There were hypocrites. Those were easy to cast spells on because they were hypocrites, and actually the hypocrites were on the witch's side. Because Satan's whole design was to make God look bad and like the liar that he is by having false religion claiming to represent God out there. So they actually served his purpose. So there was no need to call too much evil down on those people. They would bring it on themselves on their own through reaping what they sowed. So these witches hid in the woods and didn't like people coming, didn't like outsiders. So that's kind of the culture of the witch people. They're not hospitable people. So there's the witches, there's the pagans, which just don't know who God is, and they worship trees, and they worship the land, and they worship animals, and they worship the sun. And those people are nice people. They're hospitable mostly, they're not bad people. They just really are thankful for stuff. And then there's the people who are in a true religion. And the only way to identify it is by the love they have among themselves. And they don't go to war. They don't kill each other. They don't kill other people. They preach the good news of God's kingdom. And they, gather together regularly. And they definitely use God's name and know who his son is. So those people who are dedicated to doing God's will, the witches can't really hurt. They try, but they don't have a lot of power over those people. They are protected by their action. They don't do the things that the rest of the world does. So the worst thing a witch can do to them is try to tempt them, like Satan did with Jesus. Try to tempt them to do something that would feel good, whether it be sex, money, usually those two things, recreation. Do something that would be enjoyable for them. And so that's the only way they really get those people. And those are the people they wanted to get. So it's a battle. It's a battle between good versus evil. So there's this young girl who's born in a pagan state, Alaska. And it's a crazy place to grow up. But there's not that many witches there. Mostly pagans, and those are pretty easygoing people. But what happened was she found out about true religion, about Christianity, about the Bible, about God and his son and his name and his kingdom and the paradise that was going to come out of it. And she was pretty excited about that because she had lost her mother, she had lost brothers and sisters, and she just was ready for a change. And when she heard about that good news, she was so happy to learn about it. She quit the behavior that she had practiced before and became a better person. Not perfect, but better. Less negative things, actions. She took less negative actions. She wasn't out fornicating. She wasn't going to the bars. She wasn't getting drunk. She cleaned up her act. And she got married. And little did she know, though, she married a man whose mother was one of the witches of Maine. And that ended up for chapter 2. Chapter 2 will be up next week. And thank you for listening. See ya.